Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 7th of September 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We will be joined by live video Skype link by Mark Anderson from American Free Press. Well, I'm delighted to say the sun is shining in England at least, Plymouth at least, and reports across the country, quite a bit of blue sky. So we're feeling quite happy. And we're particularly happy that Mr. Tusk, who I believe is a friend of yours, Mike.
Well, Donald Tusk, of course, he is one of Europe's presidents at the moment, and of course famous for not being on the aircraft that crashed at Smolensk. Somehow, I think he had a cold or something, and he had to get a different flight. The rest of the Polish government died in that flight, of course.
Indeed. Well, he's busy speaking against a very blue sky background here. This relates to a press statement he made after he'd had a meeting with the Prime Minister of Luxembourg, Mr. Bettel. And he said, "My interlocutors also paid attention to the big and growing fear of globalization and the feeling of uncertainty about our economic future, the feeling of people that globalization only benefits the elites." Well, that was a pretty good start, but it got much better. We must help people to restore faith in the fact that the EU should serve them, guarantee their protection, and share their emotions. All too often today, the European elites seem to be detached from reality. Well, I noticed in this that he's clearly admitting that the European elites exist. There they are. So the elites exist, that isn't a problem, but slight niggle is that they seem to be detached from reality.
Yes.
So pretty powerful statement. But in the overall press statement that he made, he was really hammering away, I think is the correct description, because basically he said there was going to be no ground given to Britain. And this is lining up, this statement was made lining up for the next meeting, which is Bratislava, on the 16th of September, 16th this month. So no ground going to be given to Britain. They're not going to join in these discussions and talk about anything to do with Brexit. No, we're not having that. And what are the key issues? Well, Mr. Tusk is picking up that there's a little bit of uncertainty in Europe about immigration, mass migration. So that's got to be dealt with. He's particularly concerned about internal security. And he's also talking about, of course, counter-terrorism operations as well. But I thought how wonderful to see all of that against the background that we needn't worry because the European elites have got our best interests at heart. Perhaps we ought to just bring in Mark Anderson and say, Mark, it's always reassuring, isn't it, when we know that we're being governed by mainly appointed elites and they have our best interests at heart, even if they're a little bit detached from reality.
Yeah, appointed government, of course, is a big trend here in the States and in Europe and throughout the world to a large extent. At any rate, it's reassuring on the one hand that he admits there is an elite, but it's not much comfort when he goes on talking about Brexit having really no chance to go forward and speaking as an elite while at the same time bemoaning the elites. It's rather Orwellian in that sense.
Yes, frighteningly so. But let's not worry because we did a little bit of homework about this forthcoming meeting in Bratislava. And I'm pleased to say that details of the agenda have been put out. So we'd like to share those with our viewers today. So here we are, informal meeting of the 27 heads of state or government on the 16th September coming up. And get ready for it. Here it is, okay? So it's an informal meeting. There's 2 working sessions. There's absolutely no content to those sessions. And we did a little bit of analysis of this day for you. So get ready for this. Glad handing, they're going to be spending 2 hours. That's sort of arrival, shaking hands. A lot of cuddling will be going on, apparently, Mike. And photo 15 minutes, because all of that's got to be recorded. They're going to have 3 hours worth of lunch. This is looking good so far. They're going to have another hour of self-publicity, and they're going to squeeze in 4.5 hours of talking about absolutely no agenda.
Excellent.
So there we go. So don't worry, the European elites are clearly in control, And when they finish their lunch and glass of wine and cuddling each other, they're going to make sure that Britain is not allowed to leave the European Union.
Indeed. Delusional, perhaps. So G20, the G20 is over, of course, but what's clear is that President Obama has come away the loser. Yesterday, President Putin congratulated China for its hosting of the conference. Putin called it serious and substantive. He said that the Chinese had put their heart into organizing it beautifully, as the Chinese can do, and that it had produced results because everything we wanted was agreed on, despite some unresolved issues we actually agreed on. All documents were signed. And of course, he went on to talk about the TPP and TTIP free trade deals. He said that the G20 does not take legally binding decisions. The value of such discussions at the G20 and in documents like TPP and TTIP lies elsewhere. He said their value is that they set a trend. For example, the Chinese presidency, he's talking about the G20 here, the Chinese presidency has chosen ensuring long-term growth through innovation as the key topic. If somebody moves in a different direction, he acts contrary to the wish of the global community and violates, as it were, generally accepted norms, even if they're not obligatory. These trends are very important, so there's a certain value in this, and it's quite significant. And of course, he was talking about Obama there. And as we look at the news reports, we see that the Japan-China relationship's getting better. We see, well, Turkey-Chinese relationships getting better. Silk Road project, they want to get involved in that. Well, this is a massive geopolitical shift in orientation by Turkey from the United States to Russia and China, and
from the west to the east in real terms.
Well, absolutely, and of course we also had this business of the president of the Philippines calling President Obama a son of a whore. So this is pretty incredible. I mean, he has, in fairness, he has made similar comments about other people in the past, but nonetheless, and reports of an apology over that are somewhat exaggerated. Nevertheless, Obama absolutely seems to have found himself totally left out in the cold. But in the meantime, he is pressing ahead with his attempts to get TPP through Congress. And Mark, you sent us this statement of administrative action. Is Obama another political leader who is really off his head at this point, not really recognizing the mood of the rest of the world and the position that he's in? I appreciate he's at the end of his presidency and he really wants to get something through for his posterity, as it were, or whatever they call it these days. But is he thinking straight?
That's an excellent question throughout his whole presidency, Mike. Barack Obama, of course, is something of an enigma himself. His roots, his origins, his mother, according to the official overseas, would even be something questionable. Be that as it may, he is seeking a legacy like he did with the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, a largely unworkable health insurance company support plan. It supports the insurance companies much more than it supports would-be patients in the health system. But if there's anything he wants for his legacy besides Obamacare and maybe the Iran deal, the nuclear deal, it would be the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And this is the one area where Democrats and Republicans all of a sudden agree. Suddenly the working class versus those big business Republicans, working class Democrats versus big business Republicans, somehow that dichotomy disappears. They're all for one for all. Free trade is great. What could possibly be wrong with it? And now this statement of administrative action comes along. This is the key action that the White House is required to file a minimum of 30 days before Congress would act on the final bill to enact the TPP, which of course is the U.S. and 12 nations. So this is a key move. He issued it before Congress even got back from their August recess. It was waiting for them when they got there. And now Congress is going to be obliged to vote on a TPP bill. And what I'll be writing about in American Free Press or AmericanFreePress.net is some of the dynamics of that and how many congressmen don't want to vote on this before the November 8 general election because they're afraid the voter backlash will result in them being booted out of office or at least losing a lot of support. So this is going to get very tense very soon here. As Obama makes this move with this administrative action and Congress being obliged to act on the bill. And remember, due to the Trade Promotion Authority, Congress can only vote up or down on the TPP enactment bill. They cannot amend it at all. It's yes or no. So this is very pivotal.
Okay, well that's true, but if we look at the words and actions, because of course the United States is only one party to the TPP, they may well ratify it. If we look at the words and actions of the other people that were at the G20, for example, that are also involved in the TPP, America may be acting alone, and at the end of the day, they may ratify it. But if nobody else does, where does that leave them?
Well, that's a very good question. I haven't looked into what the other legislatures and parliaments might be thinking at this time. I cover Congress and have press credentials there on the Hill, and I'll probably be going back there fairly soon. At any rate, that's what I'm hearing stateside. And you're right, this is sort of a sink or swim on all the 12 nations from New Zealand, Australia, across the ocean to parts of South America, US, Canada, and so on that comprise these 12 nations in this largest ever trade deal. And whether they ratify it and how long it takes them is another whole question, and it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. But the U.S., the uphill battle might very well be the other participating nations, not so much the U.S. Congress, although that's going to be a big issue here even for the presidential and congressional elections. So this is going to be a pretty big fight, a pretty widespread thing.
Okay. Now, of course, this coming weekend is the anniversary of 9/11, the event which has changed politics so much over the last 20 years or so. You've wanted to highlight this article from the Rutherford Institute here. Give us a bit of background to this.
Well, it's a rather lengthy piece, and people can go to the Rutherford.org. The spelling's fairly obvious, Rutherford.org. And John Whitehead, a noted activist and lawyer, runs this website. And John's been on some news shows I've been on, the former WHDT out of Illinois. And I've talked to him a couple times about specific cases in court. And John is really good at outlining the sheer and utter unpleasant consequences of the war on terror springing from the events of 9/11, which of course were 15 years ago as of this coming Sunday. And I'll talk about a program I'm going to be speaking at for that. But John outlines in this article, I'd invite people to read it. He talks about the war on terror A to Z. A is for American police state, B is for our battered Bill of Rights, C is for civil forfeiture, D is for drones, E is for electronic concentration camp, things like this. And he outlines the overall dire consequences to our civil liberties and to our whole lives stemming from 9/11. Of course, the same thing is pretty much replicated in the UK and throughout the world, especially Western civilization type nation states. I would advise your viewers to check this out. It really outlines in pretty gory detail and very comprehensively the very dire consequences of the war on terror, a war that by definition cannot be won because no one can even define what victory would look like. So this is very instructive, very informative.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, of course, back in March, you wrote this article here, Weaponizing the Media. Weaponized media turns up hate, targets dissident thought. And as you say, you will be speaking at an event commemorating 9/11 at the Austin Truth Fest, discussing this issue of weaponized media. Just give us a few words on that.
Weaponized media basically refers to anything the media does that either encourages war or doesn't prevent it. Or it could be encourages the demolition of our civil liberties or doesn't prevent the demolition of our civil liberties. And the media does that, the mainstream corporate media, on a virtual every moment basis now that we have 24 news cycles around the world. And this is what I'll be outlining. I'll be talking about the Tavistock Institute there in the UK, some of their influence on weaponizing media, even going back to Orson Welles and the 1938 War of the Worlds broadcast and the psychological effect that had on the American people. I'll be talking a lot about the dynamics, something the New York Times was involved in the Hiroshima bombing, and then more modern things with the War on Terror, some of which will reflect what John Whitehead of Rutherford Institute has to say in that article we just showed. So I'll talk a lot about how the media is an accomplice in the War on Terror in the sense that it sustains it and worsens it and aggravates it, rather than being an instrument for peace, justice, and a check on government tyranny. The media has dropped the ball. It is no longer a check on government tyranny. It is a partner to a large extent in government tyranny.
Can I just come in and add to that, Mark? And I've mentioned this before, but I think let's mention it again, is that we've been told by journalists working with some of Britain's bigger papers that they've become quite nervous about investigating stories, particularly around government corruption or child abuse, as two key topics that the moment they start to make phone calls, or certainly if they turn up on somebody's doorstep, the next thing they can expect is the police to be on their own doorstep. So it's remarkable that we have supposedly highly experienced journalists. I know there's a lot of youngsters who come into the journalism and media world, but there are many people who've been there for years for their professional careers, and yet these people still don't seem to understand, as you say, they are actually helping this very vicious police state close in. Why do you think these reporters can't see what's happening around them?
Can't or won't, Brian? Well, of course, a paycheck and the promise of a pension has a strong glue to keep them adhered to the system. It's partially kind of a cultural, ideological thing. I've hung out with a lot of mainstream journalists at conferences that are, for journalists and where they discuss the issues. I've met Bob Woodward and some of the bigger names at some of these conferences, and they have their own culture. They believe that Watergate was the biggest scandal in American history. It really was just a small blip. It doesn't even compare to Chinagate during the Clinton years. Hillary's scandals outshine Watergate in their number as well as in their severity. So these journalists are kind of living in sort of a dream world where they think things like Watergate was as worse as it gets. They really have no concept of the police state in its depth and breadth. They don't really have the incentive, and certainly they're not paid or encouraged to look into issues deeper. And unfortunately, they propagandize inadvertently or intentionally, depending on who you're talking about, younger journalists, older managers, but they're upholding the very power structure they're supposed to be monitoring and keeping in check. And it's pretty sad, and I think the alternative media is going to really have its day. That includes us. And so it's time for the media to really be reworked and rewired and to create a new media. That's really all we can do. The old model just can't work under these conditions.
Indeed.
Good words. Thank you.
Indeed. Well, you mentioned civil liberties there, and the Twitter sphere was a bit irate about this article in RT this morning about the fact that Disney World is going to start scanning the fingers of children as young as 3. So they're aiming to scan, in order to put them on tickets for entry, they're going to scan children's fingerprints for children between the ages of 3 and 9 years old. And it's really a non-story in many ways, but what it does, because of the reaction in the public about this, that Disney should be banned from doing this, I would suggest that the better approach might be not to go to Disney World if you feel strongly about this. You have the right to hold them to account by not giving them your money. And we've got to remember, of course, this is the least of Disney's crimes because they have a long-standing connection to child abuse, not only from photographs being taken in Disney hotels at Disney parks, but also a string of Disney staff, security staff and others involved in taking images of children and child pornography and child abuse over the years. So, there are plenty of other reasons to be boycotting Disney. And this is just another one. But at the end of the day, if we're going to hold these companies to account, the way to do that is with our money, not with calls, demands to ban them from doing something.
And to talk about it as widely as possible, of course.
And staying on the subject of children then, UNICEF has been pushing this out today. 50 million children have been uprooted as a result of recent events following, obviously, geopolitical events which have arisen following 9/11. And this was their actual page on their website, 50 million children on the move. And what are they saying here? The number of children at the heart of the biggest movements of people in history. 1 in every 45 children in the world today is on the move. They may be labelled refugee, displaced or migrant, but first and foremost, children are children, no matter where they come from, no matter who they are, and so on. Well, that's true. One shocking statistic they quote, the number of child refugees has risen 77% in 5 years. Well, the BBC, in parallel with this amazing coincidence here, have produced this article saying rise in lone children seeking asylum in England is the headline. They're saying that the number of asylum seeking children in the care of English councils has risen 62% in a year. The largest group of boys aged between 16 and 17 coming from Afghanistan or Eritrea. They're saying that the Home Office has said that it has increased funding to cover the costs of care for these and other unaccompanied minors. And figures released to the BBC England data unit under the Freedom of Information Act have revealed that 104 councils were caring for more unaccompanied minors than they were in 2015. 4,156 children seeking asylum without parents or guardians cared for by 147 councils on the 31st of March this year, and that compares to 2,569 the year before. Now, of course, let's just mention once again the pressure that there has been from Tim Farron as the main spokesperson for this, to have unaccompanied children brought into this country. And to date, even though that initial demand was made roughly 6 months ago, to date there has been no comment from Tim Farron about how these children are going to be tracked through the care system, how their well-being is going to be monitored, and by that I mean whether they stay in the care system, whether they're well looked after in the care system, whether they're abused in the care system, whether they end up being trafficked or end up on drugs and so on. So these questions have never been answered by Tim Farron or any of the other people that have been calling for these children to come into this country. Clearly, children are coming into this country in any case, and so those questions still stand. Are they being looked after? Are they being looked after, or are they ending up going straight into traffic rings?
We already know that over 300 seem to have gone missing. Those were public figures, public statistics. But of course, there's been absolutely no follow-up on that. So it's very interesting. Maddie McCann disappears in Portugal. We have the government spending millions. We have senior members of the government and their legal teams travelling the world for one girl. But we casually say, well, there's over 300 young children missing who've come in as migrants, and we really don't care about them. Presumably they're just there for playthings. Well, we just remind viewers, of course, that Mr. Vaz is still in Westminster, and David Scott picked up on this and tweeted it out, which is, I think that's Mr. Vaz there on the left with Esther Ranson, the champion of children. She's there to help protect children from abuse, but many of the survivors that have spoken to the UK column say they regard her Childline as a fishing net in order to identify vulnerable children. We won't attempt to guess for what purposes, but victims of abuse highly suspicious of Esther Ranson's activities with Childline, and here she is cuddling up to Mr. Vaz. If you don't know, Mark, Mr. Vaz was recently discovered with a couple of Polish rent boys. He was also keen on poppers at the same time, but not to worry, because many people are saying, well, you know, this is all in his private time, so it shouldn't affect him sitting as head of committees looking into, for example, child abuse or conditions for sex workers. Before I just finish this little section. If we pop that back on screen, please, Theo. Yeah. We'd just like to remind people, of course, that Esther Ranson said she really didn't know anything about Jimmy Savile. In fact, she hardly knew him.
I see how much you didn't know him in that image there.
Yeah,
Brian.
it's interesting. And if that's the situation in England at the moment, then north of the border, it's getting more interesting because we've just had the chair of the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry stand down because they said the Scottish government was interfering with the work of the inquiry. And now we've got this one, a top civil servant, that's a lady called Jessica McPherson, is facing calls to resign amid claims she said it was okay for abuse victims to die if their demise resulted in greater support in future cases where there was a risk of suicide. And in fact, the change agenda was mentioned because she said if this helps change in the system, it's quite okay. Now, obviously, the article is saying, well, there's no proof she said this, but two separate ladies are saying she did say it. And why should we be interested in this particular person? Well, she's been behind the setting up of what we would regard as a false website. It's the Scottish government saying, trust us, we're going to look after survivors of abuse. Welcome to the Survivor Support Policy Team website. And if you read that first paragraph, what it actually says is, well, actually, we don't provide any support. We're going to route you to somebody else. But have a look at this bit. The Survivor Support Policy Team within the Care, Support and Rights Division, which is part of the Directorate for Population